I'm joined here by Jordan Rosenberg, the head men's volleyball coach at Indiana Tech. Jordan, how long have you been at Indiana Tech?
I took the job in June of 23, so I'm entering my second season.
Entering your second season. And tell me about last year and kind of how that went and kind of where your team is at so far this year.
Yeah, so last year I took over for Kyle Shondell, who left for the Butler job. I took over after the college season because I was with the D3 as an assistant that year. So came in, we graduated a handful of guys from that team. So really had a really senior and fifth year heavy team of all the guys that helped start the program with Kyle. So we had a really good year. We were 26-6, unfortunately lost in the conference championship to Lawrence Tech in 4. Thought that was probably the best we had played them, but then we graduated 8 guys, lost a few on top of it. So that was how last year ended. We brought in 15 new guys this year. So 4 transfers, 11 freshmen, definitely kind of put them through the ringer with our schedule at the start of the season. We played 2, 3, 4, 5, and Merced, who was receiving votes. So we've competed well in matches. We're just not there with our chemistry yet. But yeah, it's kind of how our season started. We open up conference play next weekend.
So you guys are kind of in the situation right now that you're looking at, hey, how do we get hot at the end of the year more so than like fighting for an at-large bid at this point of the year? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we would have won some of those matches, we could have been fighting for an at-large. But right now, I mean, we designed the schedule to prepare us for conference. Yeah. Our conference is pretty tough in the upper half, and with so many newcomers, we wanted them to have like eye-opening experience. Like, hey, these are programs that are at the national tournament. These are programs that are winning their conference. Like, this is what you have to do to be elite. So yeah, we scheduled really difficult early on to try and learn more about ourselves and prepare us for conference play.
So I know that you guys haven't gotten there yet, but tell me about your conference. You guys are in the WAC. What do you expect to see out of them? Have you watched film on much of the rest of your opponents in your conference so far, and what do you expect to see?
Yeah, so we've only had a handful of conference matches. I think only like 5 or 6 have actually happened. Basically everyone opens conference this week. I'd say probably the top dogs right now, just based off experience, is probably Lawrence Tech and Cornerstone. I don't know in what order they're going to fall, but Cornerstone's entire starting lineup is back from last year. I think they're basically all seniors this year except for one. I think last year was the best year they had in program history, and we matched up with them in the semi and knocked them out and unfortunately ended their season. But they had newcomer of the year, setter of the year, libero of the year, coach of the year last year. Got to assume they're a front runner for our conference. Then you have Lawrence Tech, which same thing, basically brings back their entire starting lineup. They graduated a libero, and then they also added grad transfer All-American. So those are definitely the top 2 teams I think to beat right now. And then the rest of us, I mean, I think it's going to depend on the day. We all graduated a lot. There's a lot of young talent throughout the entire conference, and so it's just going to be who can get their team in line with all that chemistry first. I mean, we brought in a lot. Lords, it's always really good. Bethel brought in a lot. Siena Heights graduated a lot. They have a senior setter leading, and so there's just a ton of talent in that next tier. So I think it's going to be really competitive for our conference this year.
Cool. Awesome. Now those top 2 teams, or expected top 2 teams that you mentioned, are currently both undefeated on the year. So you guys, I'm sure you're pretty happy from your conference standpoint on how some of the pre-conference games have gone, with the WAC kind of leading the charge with Lawrence Tech and Cornerstone, most likely jumping up quite a bit from the initial rankings that came out as the preseason rankings, where all the coaches are just kind of guessing and where we might be at this year. The next conference ratings, though, will be out in about a week. And so we won't see anything this week regarding a new top 15, but it's coming very soon as conference matches start to hit, and we've played a number of preseason matches. Tell me a little bit about give me a recap of this past week and what matches, where you guys were, first of all, what matches you've seen live in person this year. There have been kind of big marquee top 15 matchups, and what matches stood out to you right now?
Yeah, so I mean, we hosted a pretty big tournament at our place this weekend. It was like a WAC Hart crossover. So it was us and Lawrence Tech from the WAC, and then Grandview and William Penn from the Heart. So we just obviously didn't play the other conference teams. So we got swept by William Penn night one in a pretty tight match. And then Lawrence Tech swept Grandview. Day two, Grandview swept us, and then Lawrence Tech beat William Penn in 4. So obviously the matches that we were there in person, I think it was a lot of really good volleyball, really high-level volleyball. We wanted to put together an early tournament with, some teams, especially from the Heart and the WAC, because I think, the Heart's gotten a lot of those at-larges in the last few years. And so we were kind of like, hey, like we have good volleyball in the WAC. Let's try and show people we have good volleyball in the WAC. I think Missouri Valley beat Benue Mesa, I think. I think that was a big one. I think St. X swept MOBAP maybe in another top matchup. So off the top of my head, was trying to follow things as much as possible, but we were obviously running a tournament this weekend, so didn't get to follow as much as I would have liked.
Yeah, so Benue and Moval were up at Jamestown. I think Viterbo was there, and one other, Simpson, went out as well. But yeah, that Benue and Moval match was kind of the big one to look at this past weekend, with Benue losing in 4, I believe. I think they won the first and lost the next 3. And so, those kind of matches are big come the end of the season with the at-large conversations. The match between a team like Lawrence Tech and Grandview could end up being pretty big come the end of the year with the at-large considerations, as well as some others that have just been kind of going on this past weekend. With that Benue match, one of the interesting things, so they played, I think, 4 matches up in Jamestown. They played Jamestown twice, Viterbo once, and Moval once. And that was Thursday through Saturday. And then they flew back home and played Westcliff on Sunday, at the time of filming this, just a couple hours ago, and beat Westcliff in, I think, I don't know if it was 3 or 4. I think it was 3 at home as well. And so as much as they lost that Moval match, it was good for them to jump back and beat Westcliff. And I was kind of keeping an eye on that because we play Westcliff this week. So
yeah, and I think Benue Mesa's like back in the Midwest.
Yeah, they come back out, and so they're traveling a lot this year, and so that's big for my conference, right? In terms of the at-large considerations, I think the last few years we've had 2 at-larges. We've had even a third in a conversation, depending on the year and depending on the time. I think 2 years ago we got 3 of the 4, and last year we got 2 of the 4 at-larges, and so that's been kind of big the last couple of years. But the GSAC's a little bit different this year. There's no question about it, and how that looks at the end of the year with some of these cross-conference matchups isn't quite as clear as years past. And so I think your idea of running a Heart versus a WAC challenge is probably the right idea in terms of trying to create those cross-conference matchups to see how that looks at the end of the year. So that's very interesting. So this year, I think I mentioned it, this week, we do not have a top 15 poll coming out, and you are not one of the Raiders from what I understand. But I'm going to put you on the spot and ask for you, what is your top 15 today if we were rating this week and you were one of the Raiders? Let's go through some of those teams and maybe some top players on some of those teams.
Yeah. I think 1 through 10 is a lot easier than 11 through 15 is right now. But yeah, so I went Masters at 1, St. Xavier at 2, Missouri Valley at 3, Lawrence Tech at 4, Park at 5, Cornerstone 6, Benue Mesa 7, Georgetown 8, Grandview 9, Westcliff 10, and then the 11 to 15.
So let's cut you there and have you go through that list a little bit.
Sure.
So I think Moval and Lawrence Tech were the 2 that jumped the most, right? Because preseason ranking, those guys were not really even considered in the top 5. What have you seen from them that kind of makes you say, hey, we should put these guys in kind of the top group right now?
Yeah, so I mean, Lawrence Tech is obviously in our conference. We played them 3 times last year. We played them in the fall.
You're very familiar.
Yeah, very familiar with them. They're, they just have a ton of pieces that I think align with like these teams that are competing to win their pools at nationals. They just have three good pins. They have two big middles, a center that runs a consistent offense. They obviously swept Grandview this weekend, who was 3, I think, or is 3 right now. And then went 4 with William Penn. Those were their first like big matches of the season to start. So yeah, I mean, I think Lawrence Tech's really impressive. I think they just have a lot of consistency. They have good depth outside of those starters too. So that's a big one. And then I think Missouri Valley is just always an unknown. They don't do a lot in the fall, and then their roster comes up in January, and you always see some guys like that either grad transferred or are back for another year. And I think beating Benue Mesa was big for them to start the year, because I think Benue Mesa is one of those teams. From out west, especially, they have a lot of 5th and 6th years, and are really have a ton of experience. And I think that was a really good win for Missouri Valley to be able to jump up in the rankings.
Yeah, I'm super interested specifically with the Heart of America. Before the next rankings come out, their coaches rank their own conference and their own teams. I'm super interested to see how the Heart ranks their own conference, right? Because they started the year with, I think, Grandview and William Penn at 2, maybe Park at 3. Was how they started it, but there's certainly looking to be some shifts around. I think Grandview might drop a little bit, but not a ton. William Penn might drop into that kind of second tier group. Missouri Valley might jump up, maybe to the top, maybe to second. I could see kind of either one. Park, Missouri has been up there. Park, Missouri is, as we talk about, one of those top 10 teams that we're discussing, but they have one bad loss too earlier in the year. They lost to Jamestown, who Jamestown is sitting right now at 4-9, has played a very tough schedule, played a lot of the top teams, but one of those 4 teams is a top 5, top 10 team in Park, Missouri. So that was a bit of a surprising game. I haven't gone back and watched that game myself, but I'm interested to see where the Heart puts Park. Based on that game and what other big wins they've had.
Yeah. And I think the Heart opens full conference play this week. And at least I was a grad assistant at William Penn, and it was usually Tuesday, Friday, Saturday. So with the 14 teams they have, that's going to give them a lot of info going into the next rankings, because there's just going to be a lot of this. I can't remember if they're a north-south or east-west split, but I know they're in 2 divisions, and I know a lot of those crossovers are happening this weekend.
Yeah, that's one of the big matches for this next week. Park, Missouri actually plays Missouri Valley. Yeah. I think that's on Saturday. I have that as their 3rd match of the week. But that should be a fascinating and really telling matchup. The challenge with how good the Heart has done in the preseason, which they've gotten some big wins, but had some losses as well, is how much do they just beat up each other? Right. And how does that look from the outside? Because I don't think any of these teams are so good that they're going to run through conference. Right. There's always going to be some upsets. Typically, whenever I talk to any Heart coaches, they always say how they win at home and lose on the road. They just kind of always say that. They're it's so hard to win on the road in the Heart.
So true, though. I think my second years at GA, we were undefeated at home and lost 4 on the road in conference. It's so true. That conference is really hard to win on the road.
So it's going to be very difficult come the end of the year when we're talking about at-large selections. If a team has 4, 5, 6 losses in conference, no matter how strong the conference is, they could just kind of beat each other up, right? So these out-of-conference matches are certainly important, but then we're getting very close into getting into conference matches, specifically with the Heart this week. In terms of some other matches within the Heart this week, before we jump to your 11 through 15, can't forget to go back to that. Grandview is playing Clark, Morningside, and Dort. So they're favorite, I would say, in all those matches. William Penn plays Mount Mercy, Dort, and Morningside. There's that big Park versus Missouri Valley matchup. that's anticipated. Missouri Baptist plays Missouri Valley. That could be an interesting game. Um, as Mo Bap is 4-2 on the year, they just lost to Maryville in 5, and then St. Xavier in 3. That was a pretty good win for St. X. Missouri Baptist also beat Olivet Nazarene this past week in 4, and Olivet Nazarene was a team that, opening up the first weekend of NAIA play, they had some big wins. They kind of jumped onto the scene a little bit. Are they in your conference or no? They're Chicagoland, right?
Yeah, Chicagoland.
Right, they're in St. Xavier's conference, and so that was kind of a good win for Missouri Baptist as well. Then we have Mount Mercy. Should be interesting. They play William Penn, Graceland, and Grandview, and Mount Mercy is the definition right now of an untested team. They've always been, or the last year or so, they've been right on that border of a top 15 team. I think a lot of teams, especially in the heart, want to keep them in that top 15 because we know that they're going to be at the national tournament. But, they're 5-1, have lost one game, I think, to St. X, which is a very fair loss. I think they might have taken the set there.
I think it was in 4.
Yeah. And then swept through a bunch of just games that they should be sweeping through, right? So I think they're just the definition of an untested team right now. So that should be very interesting. The heart, kind of how that opens up, what that looks like this next week with some of those big marquee matchups. Go ahead, jump to, I think I stopped you at 11 or 10. Give me your 11 through 15, you said, which was kind of your second tier and kind of harder to make.
I think I have Mount Mercy at 11, Reinhardt at 12, Mo Bap at 13, St. Thomas out of Florida at 14, and then Merced at 15. But there were like 4 or 5 other, like you had Campbellsville still, you had William Penn, you have Dorr, like Olivet Naz probably, like you have all these other teams that still like, are very competitive in that range.
Yeah. So what were the key, take me back, who was number 11?
Mount Mercy.
Mount Mercy. So like Mount Mercy, why do you put them at 11? As we just talked about, they haven't really had any big wins, but they also like played St. X in 4 at least. Right? It showed they're at least competitive. Why those spots on that ranking of that second tier?
Yeah, I mean, for Mount Mercy, I heard they brought in a lot of internationals who are really good. I think they played, I'm trying to remember, I think it was maybe St. X in Jamestown in like a tri-match in the fall, and heard they looked really good there. I think, they're definitely a team where like they have the auto bid or the host bid if they win enough. They went to nationals, I think, for the first time last year. I can't remember if it was their first time there. So, I mean, obviously a little hungry within that. They get to host again this year. As long as they win all those matches, it's in Cedar Rapids, they'll get to go. I think they're probably, with like all the talent that left the heart, I just think they're, up there and going to be really competitive this year.
I'm fascinated to see them again. I haven't seen them or watched anything this year because you're right. Like it's all word of mouth stuff right now in some cases. We saw them last year at nationals. They were in our pool. They were a little bit one-dimensional. They had one outside that was pretty good, but he graduated. So I was like, all right, where are they at? Because as much as a lot of Heart teams lost a lot, they lost a good portion of their offensive contribution.
For sure.
So give me who's 12 again?
Reinhardt.
Give me the rundown on Reinhardt.
Yeah, I think they got some nice wins early on in the year. Another team, they were at nationals last year too, I think. Just been pretty consistent. And when we're talking about, that like mid-south-ish region, they're always pretty dang good. So yeah, I had them up there. You definitely use the Massey ratings a little bit to help formulate this list, and they were up on that. So I had them at 12. Mo Bap at 13. Mo Bap, they're always great. So
I had Tom on the podcast last week. So
yeah, Tom does great stuff. We're going there in March. We're really excited to add them to our schedule also. And then St. Thomas down at 14. New program out of Florida, but added in a lot of freshmen, a lot of transfers. Did some really good things. I think their one loss is to Park, Missouri in 4 or 5. I can't remember, but I've been really impressed in the stuff I've seen from St. Thomas so far. Think their coach is doing a really good job. And then Merced at 15. We played Merced in Chicago, and they just played Cali ball, and Cali balled us to death. And I was really impressed with them in Chicago. So
yeah, we play UC Merced in I think a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. So they're not quite on my forefront horizon. We've got 3 matches this week that we're getting ready for, with our first NAIA match on Wednesday.
Nice.
It's weird. It's taken us so long to get to any NAIA matches, which is interesting, because the way that whenever I play an NCAA D1 team, I will always say, hey, I'm going to play by the NCAA D1 rules, right? And there's some differences between what we do and what D1 does, specifically with the substitutions and the libero serving, right? So I've got kind of in my mind going through, like, all right, there's a couple situations that I would be doing something differently if I was in an NAIA game, whereas I know I'm not going to pull that move in an NCAA game.
Yeah.
So we're finally getting to that point that, like, my second lineup, so to say, that could be a little bit more creative, could start coming into play here.
Yeah, so we opened obviously in Chicago, and then we went down to Thomas More last week, which they're D2 in Louisville area. And so we had to play by the D1, D2 rules. So it was like odd, because like all January we've been preparing, all right, we're going to say next, we have these unlimited subs. This is what we're doing.
Are you using it a lot? Like how do you utilize that in terms of how many guys are in a typical rotation for you, and you're getting players in, whether serving specs, blocking specs, 3 rotation guys?
We use probably between 10 and 12 in each match this weekend, in various roles. We had, some de-essing in the back row, just because either their passing numbers are great, or they hit the crap out of the Bic, right? Or they're just, they're back there because they're just better in the back row than, some of our other guys right now. We used a blocking sub late against William Penn. We have a 6'7" Oppo from the Netherlands. It was like, go block balls. And then we have the serving sub that we use, who was our, top serving sub all last year. So we went to Thomas More. It was like, all right, like, where do we use these guys? Like, second time around, first time around, Larry, let's let them go serve the first time. Then if it's a problem, we'll switch it, right? Like, because we just didn't have a lot of 6 rotation players that we were working with through those first 3 matches.
Yeah, it certainly changes what you might do and how you're even at your best.
For sure.
Right? We know as coaches, like, this isn't necessarily our best. It's still worth playing these games. We're still playing at a high level, but there's some different things that we could certainly be doing, and different things that we're doing more often, right? The serving spec, right? Almost all of us have a serving spec that we use. In these NCAA games, when we go by their rules, we're only using them once a set. And that's a different feel for that kid, going back and knowing, like, pressure's on the line. I've got one chance to do this versus, like, I'm going around every single time back row. And I know I'm going to go in and serve, and I can stay loose and get a little bit more warm. There's certainly some different challenges for the coaches, but also the players mentally, just staying locked in, knowing they're going around versus just waiting for their one shot.
Yeah. It's also like when that person subs back in, right? Like, they can't come back out, right? So it's like, you put someone back in and they bomb 3 balls out of bounds. It's like, well, you're stuck for the rest of the set, right? Like,
yeah, it's kind of funny. I have a blocking spec that I can use for a setter at times, and but like, anytime you're going to throw a blocking sub in an NCAA game for 1 point, I feel like we miss our serve half the time. Right? It's just like, it's kind of a wash. Like, all right, well, I just threw a bigger block in, but it didn't really matter at all. And there goes the blocking spec.
Yeah.
So, hey, that's just a little bit of a give and take on it. Who's our, we did get through our 15, because your 15 was UC Merced, right? So you got to see them in person. Any other teams that you've been able to see in person, or players that you've seen in person, that have particularly impressed you on any of these teams this year?
Yeah. I mean, obviously we went to Chicago. Matt Pinala, the 6'2" is pretty uncommon, and he's doing it as a 6 rotation player, and he's dishing the ball really well, attacking well, just doing a lot of things really well. I also think St. Xavier's libero is really good. Like, whenever we play them, it's like, all right, let's not.
Andre Glass. Yep.
I think he's really, really good. Obviously we just had William Penn and Grandview here. I think, Daniel Galili is doing a really good job with Grandview right now, being one of those seniors that's kind of been through experiencing, because I think he was a freshman when they won their last national championship.
Yeah.
And lefty on the outside, it's a little uncommon. So
he's playing outside now.
Yeah, he's playing the left.
Okay.
So, you have the lefty Bick, you have lefty swing from the left.
Yeah.
His serve's gnarly. I think he hit probably like 350 this weekend, something like that.
Yeah. I saw his numbers were high. I had assumed that he was playing right. So.
Yeah, no, they moved him back out to the left. He's looked pretty dang good. Obviously for William Penn, they have Britton Bialis still, big middle from last year, All-American middle from last year. He's a junior now, I think. But I mean, I think he hit like 600 against us, blocked 4 or 5 balls, did the same thing against Lawrence Tech. So, they're good. The Georgetown middles are both great. They played pretty dang well against us. And then, with Lawrence Tech, obviously they have.
When did you play Georgetown?
In Chicago. In the opening weekend.
Okay. So Michael Bach, the outside, was not playing that first weekend, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Adam took a big chunk of the offensive load, for sure. And then Lawrence Tech, obviously they're in our conference, but and they have Nestor now, but then they have a middle, Akram Askul, I think is how you pronounce it, and he's blocking like 1.3 balls per set right now, hitting just under 400 maybe. And then their lefty Oppo, Brendan Down, can take over a match. He's, had like 25 kills when they knocked us out in the championship last year. So, those are definitely some of the top guys I think we've seen so far.
Yeah. Tell me about, I know Cornerstone is one of the top teams, or looking like one of the top teams earlier. Last year, they were led by their outside Ernest Broadster, right?
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about him. I have not seen him in person, but I've seen his name. I've seen some numbers that he's put up, and it sure seems like they're one of the top teams, and I'm guessing he's part of the reason why, correct?
Yeah. I got to grab my laptop charger real quick.
Okay, good. Go. You're good. I will fill some time talking about some other teams. In terms of this past weekend, in terms of some of the receiving vote teams, we had Dordt University in Iowa. They beat St. Ambrose in 3. They're currently sitting at 5-1. They have Cumberland University in Tennessee. They're sitting at 4-1. They beat Bethel. They beat Judson in 5. They beat Calumet in 4. And then we have Arizona Christian was receiving votes last time. They're 2-4 right now. They just lost to Westcliff, and they beat Soka, who's a new program out on the West Coast, in 3. Weber's sitting at 3-1 right now. They beat Warner. They lost to St. Thomas, then beating Barry and Edward Walters. Barry in 3, Edward Walters in 4. So a couple more teams that we hadn't quite talked about that might be on that outside of the bubble. Kind of certainly interested to see next week with how that looks with the top 15 matchup. All right, let's jump back to Cornerstone. I want to hear a little bit about Broadster. Broadster?
So, Ernest I think he's from Belize. So I think he went to school there maybe 2 or 3 years and then came up to Cornerstone. Because he's only been at Cornerstone for a year. His second year now, but he's a senior. He's just a high flyer, maybe 6'1", 6'2", jumps really well, just has a really good arm. He hits the bick really well. They run a lot of the offense through him for sure. They're really solid team, but he was like a good piece for them, just like more of that true like 0-1, even though he's not like the size of an 0-1, but he has the jumping ability. We sent triple blocks at him a lot last year. Just like, hey, let's just risk it because we think it's going to go there.
Yeah.
And he still finds ways to score. Like, he's really dang good. They just have a lot of chemistry on that team. So, he leads it. But they've also had, like, the setter's been there for 4 years. The other outside's been there for 4 years. I think the oppo's been there 4 years. Middle's 3 or 4 years also.
So they have some other pieces, too. It's not just him.
Yeah.
But he might be leading them
on their offense. And, I think because of the rest of their pieces being guys you still have to, like, hone in on, it just allows his numbers to be that much better.
Yeah. I'm kind of fascinated to see come end of the year what a National Player of the Year conversation looks like, right? Because in my opinion, a National Player of the Year typically comes down to the best player on one of the top 3 to 5 teams.
Mm-hmm.
right? If your team is like a top 10 team, even if you're leading the country in certain stats, you're probably not going to get there. A top 15 team, you're not going to jump into that player of the year conversation. But who are some of those like top players that you've seen, right? You mentioned Matt Pinalla. He seems like the best player on St. Xavier right now. And he's obviously in a kind of an interesting role running a 6'2". So I was actually texting with Tom Ryan, the St. Xavier coach, this past weekend about this. And he thinks that Matt's going to get not as much credibility as he might just because of the numbers. I disagree because I know Matt's a good player. I think he'll certainly be part of the conversation, but there's going to be some other names in the conversation as well. So is there anyone else you've seen that you would like look at and like, hey, who's National Player of the Year type of player?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to throw Ernest in there.
Sure.
He's just so good. Like his numbers are great. I think them losing to us in the semifinal last year, because I don't remember what team he was on for All-American. But I know like we obviously lost in the final and we got one honorable mention, I think. And I think Ernest might have been in that same category. But, if they get to nationals, I think Ernest is definitely in that conversation.
Sure.
I think you have Landon Fuller out at Venue Mesa for his 6th year, right? Pinalla out at St. X. Depending, I think you also could maybe throw in either Oscar or Caden Cox into that conversation for St. X.
From St. X, yeah.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head other guys. If Galili can keep his numbers going the way they are, right, and Grandview picks up some wins, I think he's definitely in that conversation.
Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated to see how that looks because it's just a different conversation every single year. I mean, my guys have gotten it the last 2 years in very different ways. Right, we had a setter that won it last year because our offense was so kind of spread out, and everyone's numbers were really good. And I'm gonna say it made him look good, but he made everyone else look good.
Right,
is the other end of it. And then 2 years ago is kind of pretty clearly Nolan Flexen being the best player in the NAIA. So we'll see how that kind of looks and shapes up throughout the year, and who wins their conference player of the years. Right, you got to do that first to see if you're in the conversation for National Player of the Year.
For sure.
So, all right, let's one more conversation I wanted to have. So you guys went over to St. Xavier first weekend of the year, and they had a very newly implemented challenge system. Okay, I think we got a email maybe earlier this week that it was just passed in the middle of the season saying, hey, we can now do challenges. Which is kind of wild to make changes in the middle of the season, but very NAIA edition. So talk to me about how that was implemented. I think you guys were using it, even though there's some controversy back and forth over like, should you be using it? Should you not? They announced earlier before the season started that we were going to be using it come nationals. And so St. Xavier said, all right, we're going to buy it. And then NAIA was like, hold up, back and forth. But now it's cleared. How did that go? Talk to me about your experience with that. And what are you expecting nationals to look like with that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, so we had it every match. So that was definitely like against Merced, we really didn't have any situations where we could use it in our favor. So a lot of times, especially in that third set, we were like fighting, trying to win the third set. We were out of timeouts and used the challenge like to get time so we could like calm things down. So that was like, it's definitely different when you haven't used it, right? Because you've seen it, like if you follow the women's game, it's now at most all D1s and I think D2s. So it's definitely been watching that and figuring out, all right, like how do you use it? When do you use it? For us, like even having that conversation with our guys of like, hey, if you touch the ball, right? If you know you were in the net, if you know it's something like we're going to lose the challenge if I do it, like, hey, like maybe let me know, right? Or even just having guys on our bench being like, hey, your job right now is just watch the net. Like, don't get caught ball watching. I only want you watching the net. Against St. Xavier, both of us, both Tommy and I think probably got like 3 or 4 points won on challenges. The second set was like 28-27, and our outside came up and ripped a ball that I didn't think there was a touch on. I thought he ripped it out of bounds, and everyone was telling me to challenge. I was like, all right, let's try it. And we won the set on the challenge. And so that was like, it was interesting. It took them a while the first day and a half to really like get through the challenges quickly. So that was the one thing where like some of them were 2, 3, 4 minute delays because they're trying to get to all the cameras, trying to see everything.
It can be much longer than a normal timeout.
Yeah. So we lost on a challenge against St. Xavier. So I guess it was like karma for us winning set 2. One of our outsides got aced off his left side. And Tom like immediately went to challenge because the line judge called it out. And, we like called our whole team in and we were like, all right, we're about to lose this match because that ball was like a foot in. And like it added a different element of just like slowing it down in a different way. But the games became so much longer because if you win the challenge, you keep it. And so it's like if you win the challenge and keep challenging and challenging, right?
Yep.
Like, the match for us, I think started at like 7:30-ish, something like that. And I don't think we were done until like 10:30 almost. So about almost a 3-hour match, something like that.
And that was a 5-setter.
A 5-setter, yeah. And then Merced and Georgetown went 5 before, so everything was like pushed back. But that was a late night.
That's going to throw a loop for nationals,
mm-hmm.
where we're in one venue. We've got 4 matches. They typically set up a 10 a.m., 1 p.m., 4 p.m., 7 p.m. schedule. If you have a 3-hour match, you're throwing kind of warm-up time into a loop.
Yep.
You could be pushing back multiple matches if you get 2 5-setters like that. It could certainly change a little bit of things.
Yeah, and I mean there'll be some schools at nationals that haven't had the ability to use the challenge system yet.
Yeah.
Right? So like that's also a different loop because now you're rolling into the national tournament with something that your team isn't used to. Like it was a cool experience. I don't think we'll have it anywhere else we go the rest of the year. But I mean, I know in the future, like we're talking about having it for volleyball at Indiana Tech, right? And for it being all matches at the national tournament, yeah, when you have 4 matches in a day, it might slow things down a lot.
Yeah. Are you a fan of it or are you against it? Like, what's your overall thought process on it from the coaching perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was definitely new for me.
Sure.
That was the first time I'd ever had to use it or be able to use it. But I enjoyed it because I think we all know men's volleyball is really fast. And there's micro touches or, eyes wander and an elbow comes down in a net or something happens. And, I think I was also a fan of it feeling more like being, it's kind of similar to like a media timeout where you're going to have some stoppage if someone uses a challenge. Instead of just having, a minute and 15 seconds that you have to like kind of rush through, right? Like it's interesting how it changed the pace of the game. I know the fans were not a fan of it because of how long it slowed down the game. But yeah. I think, I don't think it was a bad thing. I think it was really interesting to see how it went with us because to my knowledge, we were the first NAIA men's matches using it. So, I enjoyed it. It was it got much faster through the weekend once they got comfortable with like the software and everything.
Yeah, I'm frankly concerned about nationals with that, and I think they pushed it through for men's volleyball because they're doing it for other sports in the NAIA, and whenever that's the reasoning, I think it's a little bit short-sighted. The issue I have specifically in our sport is that if you use a cheap system, it is a wreck because it takes extra long and you don't have clarity on things with how fast our sport moves and how we're talking about micro touches and things like you do from other sports. A guy hitting a ball 60 plus miles an hour up at the net and you're talking about a little fingertip going back. A lot of cameras don't even catch that, right? We're not talking about the systems that we use at the Olympics. Those are absolutely phenomenal. Those can pick up all of it, and they do it with such speed and accuracy that it's great for the sport. But the system that they're going to put in place is not going to be that.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite concerned for how that actually looks and how it's actually implemented, and kind of wish the money was spent more on like Teraflex flooring or something like that, rather than some cameras that will slow down the game and may or may not fix any good or bad calls.
I could see it definitely like day one being kind of all over the place of nationals, and then hopefully getting better throughout the weekend. But it's the pilot year for it, right? Like,
Yeah.
Because did they use it for women's NAIA this year? I don't think so.
I don't know.
Well, you guys have used it, right? Playing,
We have used it. Like last year, we used it at Pepperdine and we used it at Northridge. Northridge's system was not very good. It did not catch all of it. They didn't. I think they had one net camera, but for the most part, the cameras that they're using on that kind of stuff is just whatever the TV broadcast is.
Right.
So they can go back and use the TV broadcast. The TV broadcast isn't set up to catch some of these things in slow motion the way that fixed cameras are and the real developed systems are. So again, I could see it going poorly or being a little bit of a mess, but cross my fingers. Hopefully it goes smoothly, but very interesting to see how that kind of goes. So, well, hey, anything else we should chat about? Any important NAIA issues or things that people are talking about? I saw some comments about the AAC this past weekend on Volley Talk. At least one poster saying the AAC is one of the stronger conferences this year, and I guess we'll see, right? Comes down to the end of the year and how nationals looks. We'll see how the at-large selection plays out. I think very likely there will be 3 bids going out, with Mount Mercy getting one of the 4 at-larges. And so I could easily see the Heart in consideration for 1 or 2 of those. And then the WAC in conversation for, probably just one of those.
Yep.
I'd be surprised if the WAC third place team was really part of the discussion. And then the GSAC in conversation for probably one of those as well. And so we'll see how it looks at the end of the year. A lot of volleyball to be played. We'll see how much we beat each other up between now and then.
For sure.
So, well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time, Jordan. And this is week 3 edition, week 3 recap going into week 4. And I really doubt that I'll be posting one of these next week because we actually have 3 matches this week. We have Westcliff at home on Wednesday. We have a match on Friday up at Menlo and a match on Saturday at Stanford. And our Stanford match on Saturday got pushed back to 6 p.m. And I will be driving back until 3 a.m. to get back home Sunday morning next week. So really doubt next Sunday that I'll be filming another one of these, but maybe I'll check in on this in 2 weeks and see where we're at, and there'll be a lot more information to give. So if there's any other coaches, NAIA coaches watching this and want to reach out, want to jump on a call maybe in 2 weeks, let me know. I'd love to have you on. So, but appreciate it, Jordan. Have a great night.